Welcome to Thoughts and Discourses on Digital Transformation. Dive into a world of insightful conversations and profound ideas. Join us as we explore the latest trends, challenges, and opportunities in the digital age.
Alrighty then, we're back for another episode on Thoughts and Discourses on Application Modernization and Transformation. And today I'm here with Anthony Matejczyk. We've known each other a long time. So you want to introduce yourself, Anthony, and tell us what you're up to these days?
Sure. Thanks, Colin. Yeah, it's great to see you again. So, I'm delighted to be here on the podcast once again. I own a organizational design practice called the Matejczyk Group. I've been doing this kind of work for about a decade, helping organizations of all sizes, Fortune 10 to startups, align their organization to their strategy, particularly when their strategy is changing or when external factors are coming into play where they got to adjust how they operate and how they're structured to win. So I'm excited to talk to you about this topic today, Colin.
Yeah, and there's got to be a lot of impact with GenAI and how that's actually impacting the organization. There was a good article about some people talking about how some of the, especially in the startup culture, you need so fewer people now to generate your 10 million ARR, annual recurring revenue, than you would in the past. And how do you think GenAI is going to impact organizations that go through transformations?
Great question. Well, it's funny because a year ago even, nobody was talking about this and how crazy that sounds, but now everyone is. And so, I think it varies by size of organization, but, one thing I'm seeing with organizations that have a bit of scale and they're saying, we want to deploy AI in a way that is responsible, but also doesn't, squelch innovation, is they're saying we've got to stand up something that allows for, call it federation of the use of AI. So the idea here is that, we have to have a center that does some things to support AI, that does it in a way that's responsible, that allows for tools that are fit for purpose, fit for use, but also allows for deployment, in some cases, direct alignment of resources, into teams, in the technology space, obviously agile teams, product teams, departments. And so what we're seeing is sort of a rapid scaling up of organizational structures to support the use of AI. Now, that's nothing new in technology, right? Technology governance and shared services has been around forever. I think the difference here, though, is how it's done, right? And so when we talk about organizational design, we worry about structure, so think of a hub and spoke model or a central model or a COE that distributes knowledge, resources. That's not all that unique. But what we're seeing is, a lot of variation in how that's being done, So, for example, some organizations are saying, we are going to ensure that every single team has an AI expert on it, which sounds crazy, but if you're a company that has an operating model that's predicated on AI, for example, Moderna is a company that they say that we're a technology company first, a medicines company second, or as a result of being a technology company. That's a requirement of how they run their business. Now, if you're a company like Deloitte, might say, AI is going to be super important to how we do tax, but you're also going to have lots of other parts of the organizations saying, hey, we want some of that too, right? We want some AI too. The challenge that the COE is going to have in this case, and they have a COE, is to say, how do I prioritize where I put my experts, right? Because everybody wants some of it. The HR practice is going to want it. Tax is going to want it. Systems integration is going to want it. So what's happening is the demand in some cases overwhelms supply of resources. And so the risk you run is that departments naturally, you know this, right? Shadow IT. They'll
Right.
they'll go they'll go native, and so it really becomes an organizational design, both in terms of structure but ways of working, right? So how do you build trust in the center to ensure that you're doing the right thing? And also, it's a hard job. I mean, if you're a lead an AI center of excellence or function, and those are becoming more and more elevated in organizations, you've got a brutal job because you've got to look people in the eye and say, look, you have to do things this way, and this is what you're getting, or you're not getting, right? And when everybody wants to be able to say they have AI as part of their business, that's a hard thing to swallow. So those are just a few things I'm seeing.
Yeah, and so do you actually think that the typical structure of an organization is going to stay the same with a marketing department, sales department, or are they going to start to break apart and so you get more groups working together, like kind of a division orientated where a division has their own groups?
Yeah.
What are you seeing? And then what about a center of excellence, right? Being in IT, we've had center of excellences for every new technology, but this just seems, yeah, every time we get a new
Everyone,
technology,
right?
right? We get a cloud center of excellence, etc., and then they eventually dissipate as that technology just gets embedded everywhere. Are you seeing the same thing with, Gen AI, and is that actually getting rolled out across the businesses?
Yeah, great question. So I believe pretty firmly that an organizational structure, call it, is a function of the business strategy. It has to be, right? And there's no necessarily a template that exists to say, if you leverage Gen AI, here's the structure you need to deploy. That being said, what we are seeing is that organizations that are building AI explicitly into their operating model, hard coding it as a platform, we are seeing more convergence of functions. So you're seeing teams that are designed that are cross-functional as part of the organizational logic from the get-go. And so, people may be experts in marketing, but they're part of a team that is leveraging the heck out of these kinds of enabling tools. That said, one of the things that's always a challenge is you have to have a home, right? So if you're a marketing expert, if you're a product development person, you need to be able to come back to a place where you have functional excellence. So you're not seeing complete de-siloing, but what you are seeing is that, when you have these powerful tools available to you, you don't necessarily need to be in that home base all the time. You can just leverage those tools to get the knowledge you need. If that makes sense.
Yeah. And how are people picking tools, and is it very siloed, right? A marketing department is picking a separate tool and all that. I know ChatGPT is so pervasive, right?
Yeah.
Sam Altman had said there's 800 million, which is roughly 10% of the world's population using ChatGPT, but there's a whole bunch of other applications, right? Perplexity. There's, of course, Microsoft has Copilot as part of GitHub for development. You even have Office 63, Office 365 Copilot for your recording and summarization of meetings. Also helps
Yeah.
you with your PowerPoint.
Does.
What are you seeing across the groups, and is there a lot of waste there with different groups spending money on similar tools?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think the answer is the variability is really amazing to me at this point. What I mean by that is that I'm seeing companies that have literally homegrown AI applications that they're embedding into platforms that are coming from sort of different source systems, right? And they're plugging into them. And it's a lot easier than it used to be, right? So they're leveraging an AI platform to build essentially the systems on which they run their business. You're seeing that a lot in life sciences in particular, right? Where they have very, very large data, petabytes of data. And they're saying we need to leverage actually different tools. In some cases, they're bespoke or tools that they own, along with the bigger tools, in order to come up with a true systems approach. One of the things I think, so if you sort of take a step away from the sort of deep expertise in the sort of everyday person who's in a, call it a support function in a business. One of the risks that we are seeing is, adoption varies of the different tools that are owned, and people are literally just using credit cards and buying the tools themselves, and that is one of the things that COEs are struggling with is, how do we avoid proliferation, right? Which is not uncommon for, you're a cloud expert, right? People stroking checks to Amazon,
Right.
But that is thing is amazing. I mean, you're talking about pharma, you're seeing this in, literally defense forces of countries that are, plugging into some of these generative tools, but also within their own organizations are built kind of almost like edge computing. They're building their own capabilities internally along with these outside tools, and they're getting results.
Right. And do you think there's going to be a top level AI officer, right? We've got CIO, CTO now, you got the CMO, Chief Marketing Officer, you got the head legal. Do you think you'll have chief AI officers, and have you seen that already coming into the forefront?
The answer is, I think the answer is yes. I don't know that at this point I'm not seeing a lot of pure play AI, but I am seeing, data and AI because of their intermingledness, right? And so, and you're also seeing ancillary things like, quite literally, you're seeing roles that are saying, we need to start thinking of AI as a stakeholder, and a stakeholder has rights, right? So we need to think about how do we have roles that are designed to support that, that essentially that role and that stakeholder. So I am seeing more elevation of that. Again, it tends to be with companies that have made a business decision and a strategy to bake AI into their core operating model.
And what about efficiency, right? I'll quote Mark Zuckerberg that says, we don't really need as many developers, paraphrasing him, than we have today, because GenAI will develop a lot of the code. You can probably apply that to every department. And so are you seeing a lot of pressure on people reorganizing to make their departments more efficient by adopting AI processes, and what's some of the pitfalls that you've seen?
Yeah, well, let me talk about some of the pitfalls first. One of the things that I've seen in this business is that the currency of business is trust and influence. And, these are things that require human interaction and that's authentic. And one of the risks you see is that people begin communicating with each other via AI. And it becomes a risk of seeming inauthentic. And so one of the challenges you're seeing organizations deal with is, how do I actually, for example, a COE leader in AI, create guardrails so when people communicate, they note and they declare that they're using AI in order to do that, right? So that's one of the challenges you're seeing. So just everyday communication. You are seeing, like you said, in tech startups, explicitly defining the fact that we are going to get leverage from these tools, and until you tell me otherwise, I'm not hiring a single other person. There's 5 or 6 or 7 roles that I need for this organization, and we're going to squeeze as much value from them as we can. In part because the productivity it's accelerating at an increasing rate, right? So, and particularly in this environment, there is an expectation that, and this is true in lots of industries, even, companies that provide HR services or provide consulting services. The expectation is, if the machine can do it, let's make sure that we have a human running it, but let's leverage all the support through the engines. Yeah.
Yeah, and how do you think that's going to evolve as these tools become more mature, right? We saw it with, all of the ERP systems, HR systems, as they evolved, got more mature. there's more functionality and features, right? For example, Workday, it will do a lot of the functionality I ever need. I can just stay in Workday,
Yeah.
book my vacation, look at we can actually look at employees, all of aspect of employees. Do you think we'll actually start to see that, and especially in companies that have a lot of data that can collect and generate their own, you know, big data sets, LLMs, right?
Yeah.
What do you expect to see in the future from that?
Yeah. So that's a question that you could go into a bunch of different directions on. And I'm not a futurist. I don't have a crystal ball, but I can say that there are certain things that call it immutable. That no matter how sophisticated we get with generative AI, and we've talked about, the people who really understand the science of it talk about sentience and, when do we get that point? We'll never get to a point where AI is sentient enough to do things like this, like make it a strategic decision based on lots of contextual variables about to make hard decisions about how to run the business or to execute a strategy. It's just not going to happen, right? It will always be there for decision support, but humans are going to have to do that, right? And one could argue that maybe at some point that'll change. I just don't believe so. I think the second thing is you're never going to see is that humans are always going to run businesses predicated on, like I said, trust and influence. And those are things that are innately human. And, the other piece that goes along with that is accountability. One of the things you hear about, when does AI start making big decisions? So my question would be, when that big decision is made. For example, if AI if your tools are creating decision support, it follows, well, they should be helping to make no-go decisions, say on a drug compound.
Right.
Let's say that go decision leads to people dying, right? Okay, so who is the machine accountable?
Right.
Probably.
There's always
Right?
a person saying yes or no. I like your analogy that it's really a decision support system for
Yeah.
strategic decisions and big decisions, right? Because there's either a lot of money or lives are going to be impacted. Right?
It is, and its power is incredible, right? And it's like, its second derivative acceleration is increasing. But there are certain things that are just never going to stop being human. It's also how, thinking about people behaviors and leadership behaviors and how they drive a business's success. Now, AI can help us by looking in the past, because AI is by definition, and what it produces is derivative, right? Here are some things that if you do them, it could make your company more, your culture and your engagement greater. But it's the people who have to make those decisions to actually do those things.
Now, do you think this is going to accelerate acquisitions or consolidation of industry, or do you think you'll see the opposite, where companies will spin off divisions much more frequently because they can be easier or fewer people to be standalone, right? If I need less people to generate a million ARR, then maybe it might be easier for me to create these small companies, spin them off, turn them public, and then generate the revenue that way. So which way do you think we'll see the industry moving, or industries moving?
Yeah, wow, both ways. Going back to earlier, you asked a great question about the role of AI in organizations. If a business strategy dictates that we want to spin off a business because it's going to be accretive to shareholders, there's no question in my mind that AI is going to do some things in organizations to help enable that, right? It's going to help lean out the business. It's going to help make decisions more quickly, all that kind of thing. The other thing I'll add, though, is that some of the most successful businesses in the world are the most complex, right, and the most integrated. And in those cases, AI can actually help with managing the complexity that's actually designed into the business. So example, like take P&G, $85 billion, well, everybody knows P&G. They have probably one of the most complex organizational structures in the world. And they're incredibly successful, even though their stock just went down 5% because of stuff. But the reason they're so successful is because of the way they run their business and their operating model within that structure, is they move people around, right? And so they say, in order to understand the fact that we're aligned to geography, to product, to big customers like Walmart, if you're a leader, you got to work in all those different areas and learn them, right? And so when you show up at your next job, you can be successful. No question AI is going to help with that, right? Hey, I'm now in the, I'm now working for the Walmart business. Help me understand the Walmart business and I can get ready. I mean, AI helps, right? It helps me with that stuff every day. So it's an enabler of both complexity, but complex, more integrated businesses, but also for spinoffs. I think it's both.
And what about capital investment, right? Especially,
Yeah.
today it's always, there's so little capital that every company has in which to invest, right? And they make decisions about, okay, I'm going to put my money over here and not over here. Now, to actually go and build something new, the cost of that is coming down, right? The cost came down when you implemented cloud. It was faster. You didn't need a big capital investment. It was more expensive, so you could trial a lot more things. Do you think that will also happen? So you'll actually see much more smaller investments. Let's see if we can get something to the market quickly we can create the marketing materials good enough. We can create the system, sort of good enough, test it out. If it is good, then we can, have more follow-on investment. Do you see actually companies starting to do that, or are we a ways away from that?
No, I think we're seeing it right away, particularly in the technology space, no question. Where I think it's the most interesting, though, are when you're talking about large capital bets, let's say in the industrial space. So, I worked with a company that does multinational farming and essentially farming services and also products. You're talking, huge volumes of customized fertilizers for geographies. They make very large capital bets, right, based on geography, based on market conditions. And where AI is helpful is it allows them, there's immense decision support that can be provided based on different scenario plans that they can run, right? So, what if commodity prices in Brazil change by this much, and shipping costs change this much? How much should we build this terminal? What's the probability this terminal will return the right IRR, right? The AI is helping with that immensely. The challenge, what AI can't help as much with, though, is looking at those other variables, right? Like political considerations combined with the financials, combined with the probability. Those are still human things. So it's, again, helping a lot, particularly with technology, is providing a lot of leverage with capital investment. But when it comes to other big capital things, it's still providing an immense decision support, but it's not actually, at the end, it's going to be somebody being pointed to say, you're on point for that decision, considering everything.
Right. Okay, so we're about at the end of our time. You want to give us a summary on how GenAI can be impactful to your organization and where your company comes in to help people?
Yeah, I'd love to. I think the one place where it's important to remember that GenAI is a transformational set of tools. And by transformational, I mean, I was talking about this yesterday, like the railroad, like the telephone, like electricity. I'm a believer in that. That being said, making business decisions about how you organize needs to be predicated on your organizational strategy to win first. Now, that being said, what we're seeing, if your organizational strategy is aligned to AI being core and foundational, then we need to think about what that means for how you're organized. And it can mean all the things you talked about, Colin. Getting leverage with fewer people, structuring differently where you're not siloed, thinking about standing up a COE with the right guardrails, but also making sure you're nimble. So what we're seeing is AI is becoming part of the strategy stack. And that's where really the fun is now, and also it's the most exciting and the most risk, and that's where I'm seeing clients needing the most help.
Okay, well, thanks so much for coming to the show, and look forward to learning more, Tony. Okay, appreciate it.
Likewise. Great to see you, Colin. Cheers.